Welcome to Circle Training Class, Writing an Offer, number 5. Okay, so what you guys have is basically every single piece of paper I can think of that you would need for a basic contract offer. I'm going to paraphrase, how to fill it out, of course, and then kind of what it means and how to present it to a client. Some of the scripts that I use to present a contract to a client that needs it explained or at least needs some help with that. That's going to depend on the level of your client. Always remember, we are not attorneys. We do not interpret contract, but you certainly need to paraphrase for your client so that they feel comfortable with what they're signing. Okay. On top, you have what you need for a basic contract offer packet. So the 4 items at the very top that are in bold are going to be the things that you're going to need to make sure you have in your buyer's packets. I'm hoping that you already have your buyer agency signed and your Missouri broker form initialed from your buyer's consultation. In other words, let's not be bad agents and go show people a bunch of property without being protected by that buyer's agency and protecting them as well. You will have to go to the multiple listing service and download any disclosure that the listing agent has available. So we simply go to MLS, look up the property, and then there should be some links, probably just underneath where the property photo shows, where the map and virtual tours are, and there's going to be a little line that says supplements. And that supplements will link you to a PDF where you should be able to find the seller's disclosure, any company disclosures, maybe a home warranty confirmation if the home warranty has already been secured for you, and any other information that you might need. Sometimes you'll find an inspection report from a failed deal, things like that. So always check that first. Top agents will even put HOA documents in there so that your buyer will have the HOA rules and regulations. So that's kind of nice when they have that. So check that first, and then download any of the items that you find in the second bolded paragraph here. So that's the lead-based paint, the listing company disclosure, legal, and seller's disclosure. Now, if you have a deal where those are not posted online, give the listing agent a call as a courtesy and just say, hey, I didn't see these were posted. You have a copy that you can send me. If they don't or you can't get a hold of them, then what I do as a courtesy is I will provide a blank copy of anything that I know is applicable, and I won't have my buyer sign it, like for instance a lead-based paint. Sometimes you'll find that where they forget to do that part. So I'll just send a blank one over filled out with the address, but we don't sign anything until the seller fills it out. But that way it just helps your co-op agents. They don't have to go chase down the form. They can just present it along with the offer. Everything is together. It just makes life a little easier. I have learned that, especially in bad markets, but even in good markets, that sometimes getting a deal done means that you do the work for both sides of the transaction, especially if you're working with an agent that's weaker. And it'll pay you in spades by just getting the deal done, it being smoother. I like to have control, of a deal. I have one right now that a listing agent that I'm working with, I think has been ill, and I can just tell, I know she's a top agent, but she's off her game. And the seller is pushing her around when it comes to agreement on resolutions. And I have a very pushy buyer, and the only way that I could get anything agreed to was to go hunt down the contractor myself to give the seller a bid, and then go get the bid and get my contractor to sign it so that I could have the seller sign it. And I don't like to be that involved, because if anything goes wrong with the contractor that I referred, I'm in the middle of it. I much prefer the listing agent to take him, like, you can take my referral, but then go make the arrangements, and she just seems incapable of being able to do that. So in that situation, you got to jump in and kind of do what's above and beyond to do the right thing, which is get my client this house, because I've shown him several, and this is the one. So I just know it's the one, it's the right one, and make them smile. So anyhow. All right, so then things that are going to be at the end of this page that you may or may not always need is going to be septic agreement, a contingency for the sale of your buyer's home if they are a contingent buyer. When you get into cold weather, you're not going to be able to test those HVACs out, so having a cold weather disclosure. And maybe you may have an as-is or in its present condition form. A lot of times that might even be provided to you by the listing agent if you have a seller that just isn't going to do any repairs and want to disclose that up front. You could need other forms, of course. You can always look in the KCRER library. You can look in the big notebook that is on the north side of our building by the copier there. There's a book of forms. And of course, everything is in .loop for you. In fact, Hannah and Bethany put all of these forms that you would need for a basic contract in a listing folder and a buying folder for you in the templates. And so just come into .loop class, we'll show you how to access those templates.
What is a septic agreement?
A septic agreement states that when there is a septic tank on the property for your sewer, that the seller or buyer will take control over cleaning the tank so that it can be inspected. Usually it's more typical that the sellers would take care of that, but there may be an instance where the buyer would or would want to have control of it. It is usually needed to be cleaned before it can be inspected, but occasionally if you find a seller that did that just prior to listing the property, it may not need to be. But yeah, septic inspections would be very important, and depending on the area that you're selling in may be required to be done by the county, depending on what county you're in. So your inspection company that you choose should have some guidance for your buyer on that, whether they do them, here's where you should go, here's who you need to call.
What if it's a new inspection? Do you think that the buyers will want to inspect it anyway?
So if there's already been an inspection?
Well, it's a brand new system, so
Oh, I probably would. I mean, my recommendation, here's the deal. As an agent, it is never your place to make a decision for the buyer or the seller. It is your place to simply counsel them as to what could or could not happen, and then let them decide how they want to handle things. So, as buyer, this is a brand new system, and you may feel that an inspection on that system might be a waste of your money. But what if something happened to be done wrong or not quite proper? Would you want to risk that, or would you prefer, do you want to risk that, or do you want to just prefer to maybe get your own inspection? Either way, I'm here behind you, but I just need to know what you feel comfortable doing. Right? So you're never making. So if she says, "You think I should get that inspected?" Well, let's see if you do. A, B, C, D. If you don't, A, B, C, D. Which choice do you like? And of course, probably getting it inspected is the right thing to do. Unless they've got a copy of the county inspection. If you've got the county and everything's been out there, maybe you could call the county and just say, "Do you
verify it?"
Verify it. Make sure it's accurate. Yeah. Okay. And that would be true of just about anything. Okay, so we're going to start with the residential real estate contract. And the first thing is seller and buyer names. Always need to have the entity of the seller and buyer. So, for example, if it's Bob Jones and Mary Jones, and they're married, then it's going to be Bob Jones, Mary Jones, husband and wife, or you could do H&W. AMP for a married, or AMC for a married couple would also work either way, just so it's clear, are they married, are they single, is it a brother and sister? If for some reason you did have a brother and sister that's married but not to each other, technically as sellers, all parties, when you list a property, would be on that contract. But if for any reason that's not happening, it would be, Bob Jones, a married person, and then comma, Mary Jones, a married person, but not to each other, right? Does that make sense? If it's single person, it's ASP for a single person. And of course, if it's a corporation, it's Inc., LLC, whatever it is. And that would be true anywhere where you have to fill out the seller and buyer's names. That needs to be done throughout the entire contract package. The seller's name should be available to you on the seller's disclosure or any documents that the listing agent have provided for you. If you are not clear or those aren't provided for you, you can go direct to the county, not through the MLS, because the records are not refreshed often enough to make sense. And so you got to go to county directly. So just Google Platte County Assessor or tax records and go into that county's website, look up the address, and that will give you who the current person on record is. Or you can leave it blank. It says right at the top of the contract that you can print the names, and if not, then they will be inserted by the licensee assisting the seller. So, or you can call the agent and say, "Who's this?" That would be probably the easiest way. Okay. Then on the street address, you're going to write that in, the zip, the county, check the state. These forms will work for both Kansas and Missouri if you're listed in either and licensed in either state. Legal description, if the listing agent has actually provided you with a legal description form separately, you can just have your buyer sign that and put "see attached" on the legal description, and you don't have to rewrite it, okay? If the listing agent has not provided that for you, then you are going to need to write it in. You don't have to have a legal description separate if it's written in here. So if the listing agent provides it, I just have them sign that one. If the listing agent doesn't, then I go ahead and fill it in. Does that make sense? And then no legal description needed. When you write legal descriptions, you're going to do it from smallest thing to the largest thing. So let's pretend I've got a property and I'm going to give this to you jumbled. So write this down and then we'll put it in the right order. It's in Kansas City. It's in Northbrook subdivision. It's in the state of Missouri. It's lot 4. It's plot 5. And it's Clay County. What's first? Little to big.
Lot 4.
Okay. Second? Third? Good. Okay. Excellent. Perfect. Okay, so that was lot, plot, subdivision, city, county, state.
I didn't know that. Little bit. Yeah, I didn't know.
I'm sure you were in real estate school. It just got past you. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah. You just got focused on the math. That's, you know.
Real estate,
Simply.
yeah, and real estate still they teach you how to pass the test.
Right,
They
right.
don't teach you a lot of
They
things.
don't make you write a legal description
Right.
on the test? Like, I had to do that. I took my test in the 90s, so.
Do you need to sign a sheet?
Yes, I will get one. Okay, questions about legal description? If it is very complicated, like point of beginning, blah, 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 I would probably, it's not exactly correct form, but you can put "to be verified by title." The only thing is, once you have it verified by the title, then you're gonna need to do legal addendum, description addendum to enter that legal description into the contract. Otherwise, you don't know what you're selling. Okay. But if you get in a jam, that would be acceptable. Which you can rely on the tax records for MLS. There's a little link to the tax records. The legal description should always be consistent. It's just the seller's names and the values are not going to be. The county, I don't think it's updated since 2007.
That's insane.
Yeah, I mean, like, I had a property that I listed that had been sold like 3 times over. It was supposed to foreclosure, got flipped, and then my potential seller had bought it, and now they're reselling it, so anyhow. Okay, I'm going to go over blank filling, then I'm going to go back and give the scripting. So on the second page, when it gets to additional inclusions and exclusions, first of all, never put personal property on a real estate contract unless it's a cash sale. Lenders do not like to see things like refrigerator, stereo system, wine bar, fridge, stuff like that. They don't like to see that in a contract because the appraiser doesn't know how to put values on those things. If you are going to include those things into an offer, you can just type up something simple that just says personal property addendum. I actually think we have I don't have a copy, but I think we have somewhere floating around the 362 intranet docs a personal property addendum that you just fill in the blanks and put in what it is. It just basically states that if the sale of the property doesn't go through, that then the personal property is not transferred. And that it's separate from the contract. If you have a personal property addendum, don't send it to a lender. So, because they don't want to see it. So, it's the only thing that you're allowed to not tell a lender. Okay. Additional inclusions and exclusions are going to be things that would supersede the seller's disclosure. So let's say that there is a swing set included with the property and your buyer doesn't want it to stay. Well, then you could add that as an exclusion that sellers should remove the swing set that they've disclosed as staying. But let's say that there's a stereo system and the seller hasn't disclosed that the brackets would stay, or you want to ensure that the brackets would remain, because it is kind of required, but I think it's a good thing to spell out because things have changed the way we hang TVs and stereo systems and stuff like that, and I just think it's good to be clear. So that might be a time when you would maybe say brackets and stereo mounting equipment to stay. Anything that would be referenced on the seller's disclosure that you need to alter or change, or anything that just needs to be removed from the property, there's a big wood pile in the back or something that is disturbing the buyer, you could certainly do that if you needed to. And I'll use this a lot. Don't see this, but sometimes I will, when I receive offers, see an agent that hasn't been instructed, put personal property in this. So pay attention to it if you're receiving an offer. Okay, home warranty. If the listing agent has already secured a warranty for the sale, a lot of times they will include a copy of that warranty in with the disclosure paperwork. I know I do because I want my vendors here to be supported by transferring that warranty. But if you're filling out and want to sell your own warranty, or the buyer has a preference, they don't like the warranty company that the seller picked, they want to pick their own, you can do that. And so what you're going to do is check letter C, and then you're going to write down who's paying for the warranty. Is it the seller or the buyer? And then at what cost is that warranty? So how much is it? And then on line 74, you're going to put what warranty company, and then what the deductible is for the plan that you're selling. And then is the licensee assisting the seller or the licensee assisting the buyer making those arrangements? Again, I like control. So I always want to be, I'm sorry, just do. It's no fun the day before closing trying to chase down an agent to get a copy of the home warranty invoice that needs to be turned into closing. So I like that, and I want to support the people that are, contributing to our office and advertising with us and helping us grow our businesses. I want to help them back. So if I can control it, I certainly would like to, and have my buyer pick a company that they like, but also might be somebody that likes us too.
That's when you get it at the beginning of the listing, it covers the life of the listing period.
Right. When you're on the listing side, and you get it in advance, and then that's why I provide the warranty receipt so that the buyer's agent know, hey, this is already done. Because a lot of them will just say, hey, it's already done, because they don't want to do the work. So then they'll just let my warranty stand. So, okay, additional terms and conditions. So this is going to be anything that is not personal property, but that needs to be clarified or written in. It is very rare lately that I write anything into this. Trying to even think of what an instance would be that I've written something in there. If it's, because there's short sale addendums now for that situation, it's just very rare I think I would ever write anything in there, but if you need help with that, you can always talk to our broker. All right, we're going to flip to page 4. We're going to write in the purchase.
Question.
Yes.
These addendums down here,
Yeah.
because this is what you're actually submitting with this stuff, right?
Right. So and I'm sorry, I skipped that. So on line 96, there's the little check boxes there for all of the extra addendums that are part of the contract. So if a lead-based paint needs to be included, seller's disclosure, you're always going to have to check in the other and put in KW franchise, because we do have a franchise form that needs to be signed. The listing company may have one as well. You may have a short sale addendum, you might have a septic addendum, you may have an as-is, you might have bank addendums if you're selling a foreclosure. And you can put more than one thing on these lines. So if you've got multiple disclosures and more than 3, you can just jumble them up, just so it's legible and they can read. what it is. And then that makes all of the paperwork part of the contract.
Even their lender letter?
No, because that's already referred to on the contract. All right, page 4. So this is where we're gonna write in the offer price. So let's just say we're gonna sell a $200,000 property today. And that's their offer. Next thing is gonna be earnest money. If you look on the MLS sheet, down here in the right-hand bottom corner, there's gonna be a section called deposit. And that is where the earnest check should be written to. So you're gonna see things in there like Chicago, First American, Continental Title. But there are times when you're gonna see the listing company. Reese and Nichols is an example of that. They hold their own earnest, which is fine. You can do that. You just have to follow a lot of rules and do a lot of accounting, and that's fine. If that's what they want to do. And sometimes you'll find a boutique brokerage will also hold their own. When I say boutique brokerage, that just means a smaller brokerage with maybe just 5 or 6 agents or their specialty. They're kind of independent, if you will. Sometimes they'll hold their own earnest. So you're going to check off, first of all, how the buyer is going to make that payment. Is it going to be a personal check? Is it going to be bank funds or certified funds? If you're selling a foreclosure, you're going to have to probably do certified funds. Now, is it okay with the offer to have the buyer write a personal check? Make a copy of it, I hand them the check back. At least I've got a copy of the intended earnest amount, and then it will be replaced once the offer is accepted. That way your investors aren't going getting 500 cashier's checks for the hope that they, especially if you're working with an investor that's going to lowball stuff, you'll be writing a lot of offers, and so it's irritating to them to have to go to the bank every single time. The only exception to that is HUD Home. HUD does require that you have that money in hand when you submit go on their website and make that offer. So that would be the only exception.
So you never keep the checks yourself, you just always make the copy. And, I mean, when you
Yeah.
first do the initial contract,
If-
they write the check.
If it's certified funds required, that's what I would do. I just hand it back to them because I don't have responsibility for it. But if it's a true honest contract and they'll take a personal check, yes, I'll hold the check. I'll take it. You know, a few years ago, it was customary that you walked these contracts to the
Right.
agent and
I
said,
remember that.
"Hi, agent, I have an offer for you, and here is their earnest check, and here is their offer letter." And, we would actually have a presentation. And, right as I got into the business, that was stopping. So people stopped doing that. But you physically gave them the check at that time, so they had it. And if the offer didn't get together, they would have to hand everything back to you. So it's nicer with scan and fax these days. And every once in a while, you'll meet an old school agent that likes to give those presentations in person. I mean, occasionally I'll just have an agent, they'll say, "Can I come present it to you?" And they'll come and meet and give me the presentation, and kind of like they do on Millionaire Real Estate Agent show. That's just
Well, some
funny.
of them even say that they wanted, they wanted it in person, but they wanted the original copy in person.
Yeah, and that's fine. You actually, as a buyer's agent, have the right to go to the seller direct with the listing agent present and make that presentation. Now, I've never had an agent ask me to do that. I've never felt the need to go and do that. There's been a time when I felt the need, but I didn't do it. Where if you just don't think that the listing agent is going to give you an honest presentation, or you're competitive, like you're in a competing situation and you want to make a plea, you can put a little emotion in what's just standard, in other words, you're not saying please, but but you're saying, my well-qualified buyers are making this offer for $200,000. We're pleased to present you with this. You can say a lot of things that are more emotional that, and they just love that the swing set's perfect for their growing family. And, you can say some things like that. Another tactic might be a letter from the buyer. Now, I've had a buyer write a letter when I was writing an offer that was less than favorable, and they wanted to explain it. And I'll tell you that went over like a lead balloon, because the seller was like, well, if they, love this property so much, they can just pay me full price. And I was a little concerned when they wrote the letter, but I had them write the letter because what I thought would happen is that in the writing of the letter of why I thought maybe they would come to terms with it being unreasonable. Like if they really had to tell the seller, you know, do you really have legitimate reason, or are you just trying to lowball them? And then after they read the letter, they wanted me to present it, and I was like, this is gonna go over. Yeah, they didn't buy that house, but anyhow. But I've done that, or I'll type in the email, like a little, like with their permission. Like I just had this happen in Olathe right now. If you are 170 and under, it is a hyper seller's market in Olathe. And especially if you have a second full attached bath, like it's almost a sub-market, because you can find them cheaper that are sitting. But if you have an attached owner's suite bath, an ensuite bath, you're under 170, and you know, on the south side of 135th Street, east or west side of the I-35, it is hyper competitive right now. And to the point where I was showing some buyers that are looking, and he's a business owner, and he just can't like drop and go down there, you know, since something gets listed. So we were kind of having to do it on the weekends and save it all up. Well, by the time we get down there, stuff would be under contract. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, this isn't working. We have to look when these things hit the market, or we're missing out on all the best stuff. And so finally, one came on the market. I sent him an email that said, "Woohoo, this is it!" And sure enough, so we went down that night. There were already 5 showings on the properties. It got listed at 2 o'clock because I have an instant feed. You know, I set up an auto search for myself that every time something gets listed, I instantly know. When you do that with a client, they'll get emails like ding, 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 and they just like it's too much. But for yourself, especially when you're tracking for something like that for a motivated buyer. So I called him, like, this just came up, we gotta get down there. So at 3 o'clock, I scheduled the showing, and every single time frame, I would be overlapping a showing with somebody. So within an hour, there were 5 or 6 showings between, you know, the 4 and 8 o'clock time frame when I was trying to get in there, which is fine. I could show it, but she just kept saying, well, you'd be overlapping. Okay, well, what if we did it at this time, you know, just so that I wouldn't have the risk of other people being in there. And we couldn't make it happen. So I was like, all right, well, that's fine. Let's just go look. Anyway, I stayed. I took the contract package with me. We signed everything that night. I didn't even want to risk driving back up here. I went to Kinko's out in South Oakland Park and scanned everything over from there because I didn't trust that there wasn't going to be an offer come in. I wanted to be the first, you know, so badly. So I wrote this long letter, and I went there with permission. I'm like, can I tell them why you're buying the house? And they gave me permission, so I wrote a letter as to why they were buying the house, and it was because they have a multi-generational family, and they actually were not going to be the occupants. They were buying it for a brother and the mother, and then they have little kids. And in their culture, the parents take care of the little ones, and they wanted it to be close to where they live now because they live in Olathe, or actually in Earnest Park. So it had to be a certain school, it had to be a certain distance from their home, and this was it. So anyway, we got the deal. Like the agent called me at 10 that next morning and said, you got it. And I was like, yes. So, because I wasn't looking forward to driving down there on the drop of a hat every day, you know, showing the house. But really good clients of mine, so. Okay, so earnest money. The amount just does not matter. It's kind of about 1% of the purchase price is kind of what you see as normal. It could be a little less. I mean, there are certain circumstances where you might write a $150,000 deal and put $500 down. You want it to be enough that the seller feels comfortable that the buyer has some skin in the game, but you don't want it to be too much that you're over-risking for your buyer. But at the same time, there may be certain sellers that will require a higher amount. Sometimes a reload company, if they're the seller, they want the buyer to have a certain amount of money down. Foreclosure, sometimes the banks want the buyer to have a certain amount of money down. Builders will sometimes require several $1,000s down. Especially if it's custom work, they're probably putting down 10% at contract start. So before they even break ground. So just kind of understand that it is varied depending on the type of deal that you're doing. But typically with a regular resale, you know, somewhere between $500 and $2,000 is going to be about right. And if it's a more expensive home, maybe you just pad that up a little bit more. You're gonna check off, is it being deposited with the listing broker or the escrow agent? That's where having that information at the bottom of the MLS sheet helps, because then you'll know, is it a listing broker or is it an actual title company? If it's a title company, that is the same as escrow agent. You'll check that box and then write in the name, whether it be Chicago Title or whatever.
So what, sometimes you'll see, say, to determine.
Yeah, and so if that happens, I'll write that same thing there, and then I'll have this buyer leave the check blank, and then I'll fill it in once I get it from the listing agent where they're closing. It's part of the listing, so sometimes that is confusing as to why they don't have something picked. But sometimes if it's a corporate, maybe the listing agent doesn't know or hasn't been given those instructions yet. So occasionally you'll see that with foreclosures more often. Okay, additional earnest money, very rarely that's going to be used, but here's an instance where it might. I just did a deal that had a 5-month closing window on it. So it was a long time to wait. My buyer was needing to save up some money, to be honest. They were approved, but they just wanted more time to pass, and their lease wasn't up. For, they just wanted to save a little money, not have to break their lease, but they really loved this property. The seller was flexible, so that gave them more time to go find the house they wanted, and so everybody was agreeable to it. But what the seller wanted was additional earnest padded into the contract as time went by. So after we got through the inspections and appraisal was approved, then we put down an extra $500. Then every 30 days after that, then the buyers give an extra, amount. And in the extra amount was non-refundable. So that's what we agreed to. In that situation, that's when I wrote something in the additional comments. is that additional explanation of the earnest. And so, because there was more than one additional earnest that was being made, there was like 4 payments that were being made total. So that's when I did this.
Your seller was okay with the 5-month closing?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep. I think the longest one I've ever done is 8 months. And that was somebody that was moving from Colorado. They found a house in October, but the company wasn't transferring them until June. And the seller just happened to be transferring to within 100 miles of where they were coming from. Like, you're almost like, could they trade? But didn't quite work out. But the seller had no clue where they were going. They were being transferred. They hadn't really even been there yet. And so they were thrilled to have extra months to make a cross-country, cross-state move and kind of get their ducks in a row as well. So everybody agreed to it, and it was fine. So we closed it. But yeah, it is a little scary, especially if you have a first-time buyer as the buyer in a contract like that. You want to make sure they're committed to the process, because they're more apt to get a little cold feet or a little remorse as time goes by. So I generally, that's my rule, is to try to write it up within 30 to 45 days of the contract, just so you don't have things happen. Because they could lose a job, they have an accident, something could happen. Something happened to the sellers too, where maybe they go into foreclosure, or they get a job transfer and their plans change. I mean, things can kind of get up in there. So just proceed cautiously. All right, total amount financed by the buyer, line 167, that's the amount of the loan if they're taking out a loan. So in this situation, let's pretend that our buyer is putting down 20%. So that would be a $40,000 down payment. So the amount financed would then be, yay, there's a math person here. Okay.
I told you I could do the math too like that.
Yeah, okay, the purchase price is $204.90, and
No, I'm not going that far.
all right. John Harris could do it. He has a brilliant math mind. He was always a step ahead of me. John, if you're listening. Okay. Balance of purchase price, $171. So this is going to be the amount that they will need to bring to close. Now, what I didn't have you guys write in was our earnest. Let's go ahead and write down $2,000. So, what does the buyer need to bring to close? What goes on line D? What do you guys think?
I know that like that.
38.
Yes. Again, math person. Woohoo! 38,000. Because the $2,000 in earnest applies towards that $40,000 down payment that they're bringing. The bank's bringing 160, so that leaves a remainder of 38. Now, if you get confused, on line 172, there is a formula there for you that says the purchase price minus A, B, C, D, or A, B, and C equals D. So if you ever get in the heat of battle and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm having a freak out. And I know it happens because y'all come to me with a question, then it says right on the contract what it is. Okay. All right, if your buyer is asking or wanting for the seller to help them with closing costs, that number is going to be written on line 179. So let's say that that's $3,000. Lender approved down payment assistance costs. I don't think that hardly exists anymore, or it doesn't get written in there. And then you're going to total the line at $3,000. If you have a buyer that is doing a loan like that, talk to the lender first about how they want it written into the contract that way. Okay. The next blank we get to is closing of possession on line 203, next page. And you're going to write down the closing date. So let's just say September 30th, 2014. And then down at 220, you're going to put in the date of possession. Well, it's pretty standard in our area. If a seller is completing another home purchase, they're moving to a different home, and they need the cash from the sale of this home in order to have the down payment or to be able to pay for the next home, closing and possession is not going to be instantaneous because the seller's not going to be able to buy the next house in advance and move out. So it is standard, and I do counsel my buyers that, hey, it's okay to give them maybe 2 to 3 days leeway time without penalizing them or asking them to pay back rent or mortgage, to the buyer. That was just kind of a courtesy. But if it gets longer than that, or the seller needs an unusual amount of time, then maybe you do ask for some sort of a rent back, where you go ahead and close, and then the seller just pays the buyer a daily fee, whether it's $25 or $50 or whatever it is. That kind of covers the buyer's expenses on the loan and taxes and insurance. If you get into a situation like that, come and talk to Bill or me about how to make that happen, how to write it up. Or you can just negotiate that way. I had a seller last year that was in the middle of a very large domino of, I think there were 7 people in this particular stack. So my seller's buyers were renters, so it didn't matter. So the house that they're buying, they're waiting for somebody else to close, they're waiting for somebody else to close, and so up the line. So by the time we could really get possession and the sellers of our home would physically be able to move, we needed like 7 days. So we negotiated 10 just to be safe in case, in 7 closings, I can't predict that everything will happen the minute it's supposed to. So we negotiated a 10-day wait period just in case there was a glitch. And said to the buyer, we will take your, not the first offer, but the second offer when we countered, if you'll give us this 10-day gap. And then all was good until the lender got a hold of the paperwork and said, oh my God, there's a 10-day gap and you're not getting any money back. This is highway robbery. What happened? And totally foobarred my deal. And so we ended up giving the buyer a rent back when we had negotiated on the point that we aren't giving you a rent back, we'll let you have a cheaper price on the house if you just work with us, because the timing was more important to my seller than the actual price they were getting. And the lender had such an opinion about it, it scared the buyer. The buyer got distrustful of his agent and then wasn't going to close unless we paid him. Even though we had negotiated this, I talked to the agent about it, and then from that point forward, everything became difficult in the contract. Our inspections, the re-inspections, the walkthrough. Even after we traded possession and everything's closed, these buyers called me for like a week about every little thing that didn't work in the
That's why
house.
this is so true. When everybody gets involved with it, it can sometimes turn, even though you knew going into it, it was gonna be like that.
Right, yes. So it just got difficult over a lender's comment. So best practice, when you have something like that, make sure the buyer's lender doesn't screw it up. You know, have a conversation with them about that. Like, hey, we negotiated based on this, so please don't get all worked up in the business. He felt that, the lender did feel pretty bad. In fact, the lender actually came to the walkthrough because we were having so much trouble. Just to make sure the buyer was happy and all of that, so. Okay, appraised value contingency. If you're doing a deal that's closing within 30 to 45 days, there is no need to really rewrite any of the timelines or dates that are happening on this contract. This appraised value contingency just allows that, you know, if the buyer does an appraisal and it doesn't come in for the purchase price, then it gives everybody options to either renegotiate, cancel, or, you know, come up with another solution. If you are doing something that's 60 to 90 days out, you may need to extend the time that the appraisal happens because you are not going to be first priority on the lender's list. If there's a stack of closings and your buyer's at day 60 and there's like 500 others between day 30 and 45, they're going to get appraisal orders before yours. So in that situation, you might need to extend these periods. Otherwise, I just let it go and leave it blank because there are defaults there. If it makes you feel comfortable to not have a blank, then go ahead and just rewrite the number that says 5 days of left blank, then write in 5 days, if that makes you feel comfortable. Somebody in the last time I taught this class, you, had a seller overwrite the blank when they signed the offer and deleted the inspection period. Put a zero in it. So probably is a good idea to write 10. All right, next page, financial terms. This is a cash sale, it's a finance sale. You're gonna check what applies. If it's a cash sale, you guys just have the buyer's bank statement. You know, if you know from the consultation they're gonna be paying cash, just tell them right then and there. Get a letter from your bank that you have at least this much cash in the bank. And, you know, then you've got it. It does need to probably be within 30 days of when you actually write the contract, so if that expires, you're gonna have to get a new bank statement. They can take a screenshot of their account as long as their name and a date shows up on it, and just black out the account numbers. That would be okay. That works for HUD deals as well. But to me, it's nice if you can just get the bank to write you a letter to say, you know, Bob Jones has the ability to make a purchase of $200,000 cash. Cover, you know, he has that much. He might have $1 million in his account, but I don't want to tell the seller that, you know. So if you can get it close to what they intend to spend, that would be great. Sorry. Used to it. So then you're going to, on line 270, check off if this is financing, then you're going to fill out all of this. Is it an owner-occupied loan or investment loan? And if the owner is not going to occupy, it is an investment loan. So like in my situation, it was an investment loan with my little guy that was buying for his brother. Is it a primary, is it the primary and the secondary loan is if there's a first mortgage and a second mortgage or a line of credit. That's rare in today's market that we do that, but it can come up from time to time that they will take out a line of credit if they plan to do repairs and they're buying a home that's undervalued. For instance, a short sale, I had that happen where my buyers bought a short sale that was probably $50,000 underpriced because it was just had not been updated since 1982. I mean, paint, wallpaper, baby blue, counters, I mean, the whole thing. And so it should have been worth about $160, and they picked it up in the just under $110. And for $20,000, they opened a $20,000 line of credit, and then was able to use that as a checkbook expense, write checks as to the contractors that came in and did the work for them. So in that situation, we did have a secondary loan. But typically, you're going to check off conventional FHA. Is it a VA, USDA? If it's something else, like a construction loan, just write it in, whatever it is. You know, basically what you're saying here is that your buyer is making this offer contingent that the financing comes through. So what type of financing are they going after? For any reason in the middle of your deal, your buyer changes their financing, They're allowed to change the amount of down payment, they can change the 15 to 30 years or vice versa. But if they start changing the type of loan that they're doing, or, change it into a construction loan or something like that, you need to do an amendment stating that they're doing that and have the seller sign off on it. Because if they didn't qualify for the type of loan that they were trying to change to, they don't have any leeway to back out against the contract. Because you're telling the seller, these are the terms that my buyer is trying to get a loan for. If they try to get a loan for different terms and then say, well, we can't get approved, no, they have to prove that they can't get approved, whatever you write the contract for. So you always want that to match. If you're switching from conventional to FHA, that's also something else that needs the seller sign off, because FHA has a little bit of a different appraisal process where condition of the property comes a little bit more into play, and the seller needs to know that up front. All right, interest rate, fixed rate, adjustable, what are you doing? Amortization period would be the number of years that they plan to get the mortgage for, and the principal loan amount. In this situation, that would be 80%. So it's 80% loan to value. So I just write 80% in there. I don't actually write a dollar amount in there, because if you do, like we wrote in 160 and we counter a little bit, then that's something else I gotta put on the counter and change the term to. If you put in 80%, it's just 80% or whatever you end up negotiating. Okay, letter C, the loan will bear interest as follows. So the primary loan will have an interest at an interest rate not exceeding a certain amount, or at just whatever the prevailing rate is. It's easier to check prevailing rate. There could be a circumstance, and I'd probably reserve this for first-time buyers or buyers that maybe would have a chance of not qualifying if the interest rates went up significantly, where they're not going to be comfortable with just whatever rate. And to protect them, you would need to cap that rate. So let's say we get a quote today from their mortgage company and it's 4.25. Well, then I would probably write 5.25 or cheat it up maybe a half of a point in interest, of maybe 4.75 or 4.9, something like that. So that if the interest rate were to go up and then suddenly that payment's not comfortable for them, they have the right to back out based on the fact that the interest rates went up. Sellers are not going to like that when they see that, when they get presented with this offer, because if it's too tight to reality, and let's say they don't lock in their loan tomorrow and they don't lock it in until next week, and between now and then we bomb rack and the interest rates go up, well, they could back out of contract, so the seller's not going to like that. So be very cautious about when you play that card. There are times, and you'll know when you have those buyers that are very, very cautious about their money and they're very scared, then I would probably cap it. But I would explain it to them, like, hey, the seller's not going to sign this if we write in your interest rate you were promised. If it even went up a half of a point, that only means $20 extra a month. I mean, we're not freaking out over that, are we? Right? Of course not. So, here's what we're going to do to protect you, but then, we're going to make the seller feel good about this too. And you're going to go lock your rate in tomorrow. Because chances are rates are going up, not down at this point. That's how I feel. Okay, buyer's pre-approved on the next page. You're going to check that box and then write down the bank. So if it's, Pulaski Bank or whatever lender you're using, you're going to write that name in. If they have two approvals, you can actually write down two names. So if they're approved with Pulaski and they're approved with Wells Fargo or whatever company, then you can write that in. If they're only approved with one company, I take that second blank and I actually write in the loan officer's name and phone number as a courtesy to the listing agent. So if they want to call and just verify the approval, then they can. And they don't have to scan a letter or try to look up the name. None of you are ever going to do this, but if your buyer were not to be pre-approved, then you could check line 318 and it will give you 5 days of left blank to get the buyer approved. I don't really recommend that strategy. I did get presented an offer like that last month. I was like, they have 24 hours. We'll accept it, but you got 24 hours, so we countered that part. They can get to a, in today's market, you can get in on and get pre-approved like that. So, All right, loan approvals. Again, I'm not altering this unless I'm doing a very extended date of possession and closing. The defaults are just fine. So basically this loan approval is that your buyer typically would have 30 calendar days to get their loan commitment. So there's different levels of approval. There's pre-approval, there's approved, there's pre-qualified, then there's your pre-approval, and then there is loan commitment. Loan commitment comes when they've looked at the property, they've done the appraisal, the condition of the home, the condition of the buyer, they've looked at all the docs, they've pulled the credit, they know, they've seen and verified everything that the buyer has told them about the money they make and the debts they owe to be true, and then they put a stamp of approval on the loan. And that loan commitment is actually supposed to be a letter that the lender sends out as soon as the buyer, that process is done. Lenders are lazy these days, they don't send them out, you have to request it. If you're a listing agent, I would specifically make sure you get that and press that buyer's agent for it, or press the lender yourself for it. You do have the right to call the lender and talk to them, they're not gonna share private information. Every once in a while you find a lender that will though, and it's always good to know. So I do always at least try to call the lender at some point when I'm either countering or get the deal together and just say, hey, just checking in, is everything cool? We've got a closing date of this, does that sound reasonable? Are you looking at any challenges with this buyer? Shut up and see what they say.
Just have a comment, this is something I ran across on the last deal that I closed. Even though they get their commitment letter, the lenders do a soft pull just before it closes, and you have to make sure you tell your buyer, do not go out and buy appliances and all this other stuff just after you close, because we almost did not close because they didn't buy all their appliances like the day before
Yes.
close.
Yes, I had a buyer do that on a 90-day same as cash, and that still hits their credit. And just about screwed up their debt to income ratio on it. And somebody else, did not happen to me when I first got into the business, had a buyer that bought a Ford F-150 commercial graded pickup truck for their business and put it in their personal line of credit. And it was like $50,000 truck with all the extras and everything added onto it. And just destroyed it put their debt to income over the limit. And fortunately the dealership, it had happened so quickly that they had bought it like the week before it closed. The lender pulled that credit right like a day or two after it hit. And so the dealership went ahead and took it back, but held it for them. And then after the deal, then they completed the sale. But here's the deal, we had to wait like I think 60 days to get that off the credit bureau because it doesn't come off instantaneously. We had to wait for a rerun on the credit. And this was several years ago, and I think now it's even easier to do a refresh. But yeah, so it was kind of a mess. So
I said yesterday, you can do it in 72 hours to refresh.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back then you just didn't have
Yeah.
online access to that kind of stuff, and you had to do it manually. So
You can tell them, and you can tell them, and you can tell them, and they still think, oh, it's not that big a deal. Yeah, it is.
yeah, it is.
They could be. They don't think that they're not gonna close tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that's so.
I once attended a buyer seminar when somebody came into town, and I've never done it. I think it's a cute idea though. But she made stickers for her clients. And I don't remember exactly what they looked like, but it was something about a picture of a house, and then next to it was a picture of a dollar sign, and then like the no symbol.
Oh, that's good.
And she would have them at the buyer's consultation pull out their wallets, and she would stick these stickers on the back of their debit cards and credit cards and their checkbooks. And to just to give them that extra reminder of, hey, and I thought that was pretty cute, but I've never executed it, so you guys can let me know how it works out. Okay, so yes, you got that loan approval period. If, again, you're doing closing that's 90 days out, you are not going to be first priority of that lender. So you might extend that time period to maybe 60 days for loan commitment, but again, sellers aren't gonna like that, So give them some time, maybe 45 days to be fair, 40 days just to work through the file. But at the same time, we always want the buyer to be pre-approved and be pushing to get that information. Because the contract does particularly say that if you don't get that loan commitment, seller may cancel the contract. So we don't want that.
There could be a backup this way.
Yes. And you only have that time period to say that the buyer is not approved, because if something did happen and the buyer couldn't get approved, they can get their earnest back. But if you wait till after this time period and then they can't get approved, the buyer cannot get their earnest back, the seller gets to keep it. So I have a court case where that happened to a seller of mine, and they took it to small claims court, and Doug had to go testify for it, and show him copies of our emails and when things, the timelines of when things came in, because the buyer's agent was being unattentive. And so the buyer ended up emailing me directly his decline letter, because he couldn't get a hold of his agent to do it. But it was on day 31. And my sellers held him to task on that. And we ended up winning the court case. And the judge gave us this, and it's day 31. It says right here, day 30. And so we got it, but it took like a year. And it was like $500 earnest. It was hardly worth it. But my seller was just like, he spent money on a termite treatment and did some other repairs that he wouldn't have
More
done.
the principal effect.
He was one of those people. So it was fine. I have a 50-50 split on my listing agreements, that if an earnest is covered, we get 50%. So we got $250 and he got $250. So at the time when I actually got the $250 check, I was kind of cool.
Yeah.
but then, it's kind of like, well, I would have rather sold the house.
Yeah.
Okay, lender appraisal requirements. Trends change on this. What I am doing right now is leaving this blank. If you are selling a property, especially if it's FHA, and you feel like there are going to be some things that will get called out by an FHA appraiser, such as peeling paint, no rails on steep stairs, no railings on balconies that are higher than maybe 3 feet off the ground, things like that would be safety issues, big hole in the roof. Those are all things I would try to negotiate during your inspection process. But in the event that something gets missed on inspection or isn't thinking that it's a big deal, but the FHA appraiser does think it's a big deal, it's nice to have a pre-written agreement that, hey, Mr. Seller, if something comes up on the condition report of our appraisal, you'll help us with up to X amount. Now, the reason that I kind of quit doing it and filling a blank in is because, number one, the seller's kind of in a bad place anyway. Because if they don't agree to do the appraisal work, well, guess what? The appraisal doesn't go through, and my buyer doesn't buy the house. So now you're stuck with probably having to fix it anyway. Number two, I've actually had an agent put an amount in that was like $100, and what ended up coming back was they wanted an engineer report because there was a patio that was sloped towards the house, and there was no structure issue. The inspector just said that was just a settled patio. But the FHA appraiser was concerned enough that he called out an engineer inspection. Well, that cost $250, and then of course the engineer said, well, there's no problem, but this needs to be mud jacked, and to prevent a problem, and then we need to have some downspouts, and so there was like, $500 worth of work, plus the cost of the report. And because they were in 100, my seller said, well, that means we only have to pay up to 100, so can we go back against the buyer? And sure enough, I asked the buyer's agent, and they contributed. So we negotiated a little bit. We paid a little bit more, but the buyer paid us for part of it. So, so when you put in a number there and it's not enough, then that opens your buyer, in my opinion, for risk. On the other hand, if you write a number in there and it's plenty, then it protects your buyer. So I think it's just kind of a renegotiation, and I'll just counsel my buyers, hey, look, we're gonna leave this blank because we just don't know what an FHA appraiser is gonna say about the house. Seller's gonna get stuck with it either way. If you guys can't buy the house, they're probably gonna have to disclose it to the next buyer. So really, they'll probably help us with most of it. But if it is your lender requiring these repairs, technically that's your problem, not the seller's problem, or you can look for any type of financing. An FHA appraisal will stick with the property for 3 to 6 months. that rule has changed a couple of times, and I don't remember which it is right now. So let's say I've got a listing, buyer does an appraisal on it, and the appraisal comes in short, and there's all these conditions. We don't get the deal together. You bring the next buyer, they're also FHA, well, that appraisal sticks. So you get to use the same appraisal, yay for you,
Yeah.
but bad for my seller, because now it's not like we can even get a different appraisal. If it's conventional loan, those appraisals do not stick. So if it fails, you can get a conventional appraiser, and a lot of times you'll get a different opinion. It should be an exact science. It's not. FHA should be an exact science, especially on condition and things that they check for. I've had a deal where there's peel and paint on the back of the house, exposed wood. FHA appraiser doesn't catch it.
Yeah.
Doesn't call it out. I've had other FHA appraisers go in and act like inspectors, turn on water takers, you know, there's a drip under that sink, you know, go into the bathroom, you know, here's this, here's that, take off a breaker panel, look for double taps. I've had them do all kinds of things like that. And then I've had others that will just walk in, take a general look around, okay, it looks good, as long as we have hot water and heat, we're good, out the door. So it is not an exact science, unfortunately, and it can vary from appraiser to appraiser, and so can the comps, unfortunately. Okay. We can skip to the survey, line 416. There is a page 9, following along. There is a built-in number of days, which is 10 prior to the closing date, for the buyer to do a stake survey of the home if it is their choice. It is my recommendation to every single buyer that they do a stake survey on every property they purchase. And yet, 2 out of 100 will take me up on that and get a stake survey. Let me explain why. This might be important. I sold a house that was on a slow corner, and then it wrapped into a horseshoe. Their house is the last one in a line. I didn't really draw this to scale. Last one in a line that kind of match up. And then there's a bunch of houses on the corner. I don't remember how all the yards came together. But what I do remember is that the house next door, their driveway faced the corner, and their house sat here. So their backyard was on the side of my buyer's potential home, which was like normal, like that. They have a swing set, and I am certain that the end of the swing set is on the property line. I mean, to the point where I'm like, I really think you need to have a survey done, because I think they're encroaching. They were gonna do a privacy fence anyway, so they were gonna have to have a survey for the fence, per the HOA guidelines. So they were like, you know what, let's just do it. We'll do it, you know, no problem. And so we do the survey. Turns out, this is fine. The property line is actually scarily tight to the house. What's not okay is how all of these yards match theirs, because this is not a straight line. It kind of went like this. And somebody over here set their fence back. Somebody over here guessed and went over here. Somebody over here guessed and went across the line. Somebody over here went back behind. There was like 4 encroachments behind and over, where this corner, because everybody had triangle-shaped lots with a little bit of fence that was parallel in the back, and nobody did it right. It was all screwed up back there. So when we got the the survey report, and it's like there's disclosed, what do you call it, encroachments, I was shocked to find out that this was okay and this is all messed up. So we go drive over there and look at the property, and there's like the pink tags are like this side of the fence, that side of the fence. It was just hysterical the way this all went down. So we tell the seller, this is like, it's within the time frame, but it is after inspections. And we tell the seller, hey, this is all messed up. Can you please go over there and have these other people move their fences? There's an encroachment. We won't have a clear title unless this is fixed. And the seller pretty much gives us the finger and says, not my problem. It's not my fencing. I can't control them. Buy it or don't buy it. Up to you. So my buyers, your first-time buyers, were scared to death, and it just happens to be bold season. So I'm like, you know what? Let's just go door knock them. Let's just go door knock them. So I made copies of the survey, and we door knocked all of these neighbors. I think there was 4, and, you know, talked to them about, you know, the fencing. Got a hold of all of them, and like almost all of them except for one was like, yeah, we kind of knew something was messed up back there when we saw the stakes. You know, they knew it was messed up. And so they all agreed that they would have a fence moving party after we moved in, and they would just have a big barbecue neighborhood party, and they would, because somebody was he did this for a living, and somebody else, you know, worked in a lumber place, and so they all just pulled their resources together, and then helped him build the backside of his privacy fence, and then, you know, he did his own fence on the sides, but it's pretty cool. So they got all fixed. So after that, then they can resurvey, have it rechecked. Then once it's rechecked, that will get corrected with the title company, and then the title company will provide boundary insurance if you have a clear survey. And because your boundaries are not covered with general title insurance, only the rights to what you bought. But it doesn't specifically say, and you bought this and nobody's encroaching you.
But how did you get it fixed if everybody because the one person didn't do it, so.
The one person
still
just,
would have left it messed up.
and he did, eventually agreed, he just was not happy. Like my experience was not, yeah, whatever, you know? And so eventually the other neighbors that knew him kind of got him on board and said, hey, look, we gotta fix this, because all of our properties are gonna have a problem when we go to sell.
Sooner or later,
Right,
And then all
so,
5 of those people probably called you to sell their house when it was time.
well, nobody has yet, but.
They're going to.
But they probably will. So yes,
Yes.
I put them on a touch system, and then we'll see what happens, you know. But anyway, but that was an easy 4 contacts for me that particular day. 16,
Yeah.
only 16 to go. Okay, maybe 15 because I count talking to my buyer. Asking for a referral. Anyway, so yeah, so you just never know where that's going to lead. Another example, and this happened to an agent that actually worked for our firm. She doesn't work with us anymore. But she bought a property that was in a very established neighborhood. Fencing is already up. She buys in January or February. It's snow on the ground. She can't test the irrigation system because it's cold. And so she moves in, May comes up, and she finds out that she's watering the back 10 feet on the other side of her fence of her neighbor's yard. And so she's like, well, that's weird. So she goes and knocks on his door. It's like, hey, what do you know about this? Slam. He just shuts the door in her face, just shuts her down. So she comes in to talk to Chicago Title, closed her deal, and said, I have a feeling that there's something wrong, and I need your help. And Chicago's like, well, you didn't do a survey, so we can't help you with the boundary coverage. If you had, then they would help you to fight that, to protect it. So she learned a lesson because she thought that was automatically included, and it wasn't. But what ended up happening is she did the survey. Sure enough, the boundary line went back here. Well, what had happened was the woman that owned this home was like in her 90s. And and her family, I think she had passed, and the family sold the house. Well, they had no clue, you know, what was going on. They didn't live here. And this guy had built this fence up, and this elderly woman just didn't have the inertia or, you know, whatever to fight it. And so she just let it happen. And so this agent had to basically, I don't remember how she eventually got, I mean, I think she had to do the survey, give the guy notice, and she moved the fence, but it was at her expense to move it. And it was bad between the two of them. All after that, you know. It's
So
just
don't the
painful.
vendors ever require surveys anymore?
No. And even when they did, it was just a drive-by survey.
Well,
So
that's true, but
they
at
would
least-
just take and eyeball it. I don't know that you could have eyeballed that and known that that was 10 feet off the mark. I'm not sure that you could have known that.
What's the average cost?
About $500 to $1,000 is not a cheap thing to do, which is why most buyers just take a risk, you know. So my script for that is just, you know, Mr. Buyer, here's why you should probably think about doing the survey. But many people don't because of the cost, and so it is your risk. And just know that if you buy the house and there ends up being an encroachment or a problem, you are inheriting that problem if you don't do the survey and get it corrected.
And she was even a realtor.
She was.
Yeah.
I was kind of sad. But, I mean, we all learned
Oh.
an amazing lesson because of it. And she, you know, was very willing to say, hey, this happened. Make sure you guys don't tell your buyers that this is covered. So, yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so that's the survey part. Then we get to the inspections. So the next, like, 3 pages, you're gonna write in how many days do your buyers have to do inspections. 10 is our standard, but you can write in more if you need to, especially if you're doing country property where you are gonna do a survey maybe, or there's things that need to be inspected, like septics, lagoons, ponds, barns, you know, something else, you know, that might come up. They have a well or something that needs extra people to look at it, then you may want to give yourself a little more time. Then on page 10, you have the additional instructors that need to be included in the inspection. Well, per the language, I think everything within 30 feet is subject to a termite inspection and being inspected. But if you have a shed that's like on the backside of some acreage that, or a barn that has electric to it especially, I don't know if a shed really needs to be inspected, unless the buyer really cares about it. But, you know, if you do have a working barn with plumbing and electrical, that may need to be inspected, definitely. So if you want that to be included, make sure that you write that stuff in for the termite and for your whole house inspection, that's gonna be included in your inspections.
I just make a comment there, and this is for, I don't know how many of y'all deal with older properties. I used to work for an investor, and I did this on the house that I have a contract on right now, because it's in a historic area, sewer spills. In the city of Kansas City, they used to use old clay sewer pipes, and they collapse after so long. It's a very expensive repair. Costs you a couple $100 to have a sewer spill done. In addition to your regular inspection, it's just worth it. Yeah, that peace of mind, because if they want to do a, like line to line, they can do it trenchless now, but it's still like $4,000 to do it. They have to dig it. It can be really super expensive. So spend $200, have a sewer spill done, especially if the house is actually, like I said, over 20 years old, you might want to do it, but especially if you're buying an older home in Kansas City, Missouri.
Or the biggest house trees.
Yeah.
I had one
Do it.
done off of 32nd, and Prather, kind of, you know, North Kansas City Hospital area, and every single, that was the first sewer scope I'd ever had a buyer do. It was very entertaining. I actually have pictures of it on my cell phone. If you want to see what it looks like, and you can't really see, like, it's not like, I thought you'd see like a bunch of sludge and stuff, you don't really see that. But what you do see is like where the pipes connect, those old clay pipes, every single connection was broken, and it was off, and you could see it, you know, and it wasn't like totally off, but it was just like every single place was compromised. And so we went in and renegotiated. My buyers took care of the sewer later, but we did negotiate going in. So. Okay, so buyers have the right to do inspections. They have to pay for those inspections, and they should do a termite inspection because it's already pre-written into our language that termite treatments must be done by the seller. If your buyer does the inspection and finds out that there's cause to have a treatment done, the seller automatically has to pay for it. It's not even something that's negotiated. The only time that may not come into play is if you're selling distressed property. Then your buyer, after they have their inspection, so if you write in 10 days, your clock starts ticking. So today is the 14th. So if we signed a contract together today, my buyer, your seller, and your seller signs, the last person to sign and date the contract, and the effective date of that contract is today, the 14th. Tomorrow, the 15th, is day 1 and 2, right? So you count, so you don't start with the day that you signed, it's the next day that starts your clock. By the end of that 10th day, you must have back to the agent a list of any repairs, or just let them know that the inspections went fine and they're taking the property, or that the inspections went poorly and they're backing out. Okay, see, that's called an inspection notice. If you're asking for repairs, then you will also need a resolution of unacceptable conditions. I've given you examples of all of that in the packet that I gave you.
Everything is fine, you still need to do an inspection?
Still need to do an inspection notice, yeah. The only time that you would never need an inspection notice by our file compliance is if you are selling a bank-owned property and waiving inspections where you are buying it as is and there's no inspection period allowed.
So
And
if
which-
everything's fine, you still gotta have an inspection on this.
That just says we're done and it's cool. Yeah,
The resolution is done, we gotta figure this out. And then
Right.
we gotta,
yeah, exactly. Okay, then we're gonna get to page 14, line 660-ish. This is the brokerage disclosure form. In the old days, this used to be a separate form all by itself that we'd have to get signed. I love that it's part of the
Me too.
contract. It is confusing though, because buyers and sellers both have to sign in this little section, and whether or not they take the contract or they counter. So it's always hard for a seller to have to go through here an initial, we'll talk about that in a minute. But as the buyer's agent, it is your responsibility to look on the MLS sheet and right under like the listing agent's name in the middle of the sheet, you'll typically, so if this is the listing, here's the picture, about right in here, you're going to see ER for an exclusive right to sell, or a TA for transaction, or it could just say seller's agent. And depending on the level of brokerage relationships that that particular firm offers and how that agent signed the relationship. If you're working with a mainstream brokerage, thank you. So it says listing agent capacity, this one's a designated agent. So then you know that it's designated. And that they have an exclusive right to sell, which is the list type is an ER. If it could just say seller's agent or could say transaction agent there. So you will check off how the seller is representing their side. So in this situation, we'll just use hers, that's a designated, so you're gonna check off designated. It's your responsibility to do that. Then you're gonna check off how you're representing, which will say we're designated buyer's agents. And then how are the agents in this transaction being compensated? If you are a buyer's agent who is not charging any additional commission or fee, then the seller only is going to be paying commission. If you are charging your buyer a transaction or additional broker commission, then you're going to check buyer as well. If you were selling it for sale by owner and the buyer was paying all commission, then you would check buyer only. So whoever's paying the commission or any part of any commission, it needs to be checked. You're gonna sign it where it says licensee assisting buyer. Your buyers are gonna sign it. For any reason, you write an offer and you're not representing the buyer, you are still the licensee assisting the buyer.
Yeah.
Assisting does not mean representing. It just means I'm the one that's helping them get this together, okay? So that.
So it really doesn't matter your name wise,
Pretty much. Pretty much. And that could be true, like if I'm selling my own listing and my buyer's not represented, I'm signing both as a listing agent and as the assisting.
Yeah, it's both as well.
Exactly.
That's what.
Yeah, you just have the opposite problem, yeah. Okay, go to page 17, the last page. Expiration. You need to write in an expiration of this contract. This date does not mean that the seller must respond to your buyer by that date. It's at the top of the page, line 797. All that means is that if the seller does not respond by that time, the buyer can move away from the contract, not be committed to it, and find something else to buy. Or rewrite it. If they want to rewrite it, the offer would not have to continue. Now, sometimes you'll write this and it'll expire and the seller's agent will come back to you and say, hey, they're out of town, can you give us another 24 hours? I would just verbally let that go, just tell the buyer what's happening. And then if you end up countering on a counter, that one of the conditions needs to be the expiration is extended. Okay. As long as you have an agreement with both sides that, hey, we're gonna let the offer stand, that's fine. But what this prevents, if you leave this blank, for example, and 2 weeks later, your buyer's moved on, and suddenly the seller decides, hey, you know what, that was a pretty good offer, let's just sign it. They can sign it and legally commit if you don't put an expiration date on that offer, or otherwise withdraw it. So it's good to have an expiration on there. Do give your listing agents enough time to get the offer and respond to it. If you're writing up an offer at 6 o'clock at night, you make it expire at 9 o'clock the next morning. I mean,
Yeah, so-
how's the agent supposed to make that happen? So, be fair, give people enough time. But I will tell you, on the deal I just wrote, where I was competing, I did put a expiration on it at like 2 o'clock that next day. Because I didn't want them to just sit and wait and start collecting offers from other people that might show the property. So it's appropriate, do it when it's appropriate, but you better have a conversation with that listing agent that says, hey, if I present you an offer tonight at 11, can you get it, can you get a hold of the seller by tomorrow
So
afternoon?
you want to communicate with the listing agent first?
Absolutely. In fact, let's back up. The very first thing that you should do whenever you think you're going to write an offer is call I wish Dawn were here, is call the listing agent. I just gave her these instructions, and and then you ask them, and you just say, hey, I have a buyer XYZ, they'd like to buy the property. Is there anything I need to know? Ask the listing agent that question, and shut up. The first person that talks loses, okay? Most agents are gonna get really uncomfortable right then and start blabbering. And they're going to tell you things they should not tell you. Doesn't mean you can't know them, but it's just they get nervous. And especially if you're working with an agent that hasn't done a lot of deals, suddenly they start giving you motivation, they start telling you why the seller wants to move, what they're worried about. You will get a lot of information. And I once did this with a top agent, and it was in worse times. The property was probably worth all of $300 to $320. It was priced at $280. We had looked at a lot of houses. My buyers were very happy with this house. They just wanted to get in it. We were going to start around $260 and see what we could do. Call the agent. Hey, I think we're going to write up an offer. What do I need to know? Oh my God, I'm so glad that you're writing an offer. These people are driving me crazy. She says, I told them, this house had been on the market for like a year and a half. I told them that the house wasn't going to sell for a dime over $240. You write the offer for $240, I guarantee you I can get it signed. Really?
Yeah.
Tell me more. So anyway, it turns out her listing was also expiring like the next day. So she was very motivated to get it under contract. So I call my buyer and say, hey, got a new offer price. We're going to change the paperwork because I had already kind of put it together so I can get a hold of this girl initially. And I said, we're going to change this, and here's why. I tell them what's happened. And she's like, they're not really going to take $240. And I said, I don't know. That's what the agent's telling me, but what they'll actually do, I have no idea. But let's just start there. That's what she said. She's the one that's going to have to defend it to him, and her listing is expiring, so she's going to be motivated to get the deal together. So we ended up buying it at $260. So I saved my clients $20,000 or more by just making a simple phone call. And but you'll get a lot of things, and sometimes you'll find out what is concerning. Like what's the most important thing to the seller? Oh my gosh, they really have to find a home, and they're so nervous they're not going to be able to find one. Is there any way you can give us like a 45-day or 60-day close? Well, if your buyers are flexible, write the offer to those sellers' fears, and they may give you back price. Or you can play it the opposite, write it aggressive and counterback. Use some negotiation skills, figure out what you think is going to work better, and then counsel your buyer accordingly, and kind of let them decide how they want to play, how they want to play. A common script for me is, I am a sword master. I will hold the sword and I will use it. I know how to use it. But you need to tell me, how do you want me to hold it? Do you want me to hold it like, really just like beat somebody up, or do you want me to go in and just gently slice? How do you want me to hold the sword? And I know my scripts, I know what to do, I know what to say, but how do you want me to respond? And then, because sometimes you'll get a buyer that they love to play ping pong. And I have one like that likes to play ping pong. So they want to go in really low just to see what the seller will do. They know they're not going to get it for that price. They just like to play ping pong. And I did a very large deal last year, and my buyer is a negotiator. And the listing agent on the other side was not. In fact, when we got to round 3 or 4 of the counter, she was exhausted. She was like, I can't do this anymore. And I'm like, this is hundreds of thousands of, I mean, it was a very large deal. And I'm like, every little bit here, I mean, we're talking about moving a payment $100 at a whack, or $200 at a whack. And so somebody taught me this once in a negotiation class. And I use it, I talk to my buyers and sellers through this a lot, especially when you have a seller that you're presenting a bad offer to, is that, have you ever stood at a harbor and watched an oil tanker, a very large ship, have to come in and dock? What happens, right? So they're in the ocean and they need to get into a space that's not much bigger than the ship itself, right? And they're in a harbor. So how do they get in there? Tugboats, right? So the little guide boats get on each side, and this one gives a little push, and then the boat goes over here, and then this one gives a push, and the boat goes, it gets corrected, right? And then they push back and they push forward, and somebody's pushing here until they just gently get that thing where it needs to be, right? The little tugboat does not go, oh my gosh, the boat is way over here. No! Right? Because what would happen? Waves, chaos, destruction, feelings get hurt, right? I mean, just badness, people drown, I don't know. And the dock goes away, the boat flips over. I mean, just badness happens. You can't do these things, and you can't make big moves in just one big step and just expect it to happen. Sometimes you just need a little push, a little push, a little push, a little push. And if you try to go right to the middle of something, sometimes it won't work because the buyer still wants to do the momentum, or the seller may want to still do the momentum and to see where they get. You may still end up at the same place, but every deal has a different personality. And you don't know until you talk to the agent, find out who the other people are if you can, find out who your buyers are and what they want and what's important to them, and then try your best to negotiate in there. But that tugboat theory has gotten me a long ways with people, and more so with my sellers. But I did use this analogy on a buyer not very long ago, and they were like, oh, I get it. Okay, so we just need a counter. Yeah. That's kind of what I'm saying.
If they want to go in lowballing, and there's 2 other offers, that's important to know too.
That's exactly correct. Have there been any other offers? Have you had inspections ever done? Have you had a failed deal? Ask them some questions. Sometimes you'll get some stuff that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So, just don't be afraid. Even if you know that they shouldn't tell you, don't be afraid to ask them. Just don't. Okay, now I'm going to just very quickly run right back through this and treat you as if you're a buyer, so that you guys know how to kind of present these contracts. Now, it is completely acceptable to just put this in front of the buyer and just go read it, sign it. It's okay. You don't have to be a master at this to make it happen. But in the instance that you have a buyer ask you, what does this mean, or what does this say, I want you guys to have some scripting, or at least hear this, so that you can be comfortable presenting it to somebody, okay? And because I'm always presenting upside down, I'm going to have this upside down. Okay, so Mr. Buyer, your, this is the contract, and so we've got your names and the seller's names, and obviously the property address, and the legal description. And we get down here to the bottom. This is a list of everything that, if it exists in the home today, should remain with the property. This is also a great time to ask that buyer, is there anything that is in the property that they are especially attached to? Because when it comes to drapes, blinds, things that should technically stay, TV, brackets, I just went through this. Tina was the buyer, Gable's assistant of one of my own listings, and my sellers didn't really interpret this correctly, and to be honest with you, neither did I, because they've never come up, but they took the TV brackets off the wall because they had hanging TVs. And so anyway, I paid for some brackets. I wasn't gonna have Tina upset. My sellers did we had some other issues, but anyway, so yes, we got the little gift certificate.
They're really supposed to be attached to the walls, right?
Yeah, those TV brackets, if you're hanging, especially a bigger one, It's not just a couple of screws, it's like some big screws and a bracket that the TV actually slides down on, and those have to be put into, they have to be anchored in to hold those TVs up. So those are technically, it's on this list as staying. So our window blinds, curtains, coverings, and components. And I once had a very, very bad deal where the buyer did not tell me, she was a little older in life, did not tell me she was pregnant, had no clue. And when they bought the home and fell in love with this particular house, it had a nursery where there was a certain logo, theme, if you will, in this nursery. It was a little teddy bear holding some blocks and a ball. And there was a light switch plate cover that had that logo on it. There was wallpaper, there was, all of our nursery equipment had that stuff on it. It was branded. And so was the curtain rods and pull chain poles and all of this. And so we go to do the walkthrough, and the seller has removed, left the blinds, but took down the curtains and the rods that had that little teddy bear block, took down the things off the ceiling fan, all of that stuff. And my buyer absolutely lost her mind when she walked into that nursery. And I was like, what's wrong? And she's like, well, she took the stuff. And I was like, okay. So, I did not understand. Well, I'm pregnant, I was planning on using that. And now she's just ruined it. And and probably because she's pregnant, she's a little not thinking straight. But anyway, train wrecked us, stopped our closing for 24 hours while we negotiated over some stupid finials on a curtain rod. And some pull chains, so anyhow, we ended up getting through it. But it was the worst experience of my life. And what had started as a really good relationship with these particular people, because we had sold their home very quickly in a bad market, found them this one, deteriorated. That she was so angry with me for I don't know why, but just trying to negotiate and find common ground just made her mad. And so anyhow, kind of screwed everything up. So from this point forward, I do talk to the buyer about, is there anything that needs to stay or go? And if they took down some curtains or some curtains that match their bedding or things like that, are you going to be upset about that? Let's talk about it.
And you can address it right here.
Then I can address it.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's what we're going to talk about. So then, this is pretty self-explanatory. You're just going to go over what you're offering. Same thing with the pricing. Do remind your buyer that the earnest deposit does actually get cashed when you say hold the deposit, or the title company's going to hold your earnest. They actually think the check's sitting in a drawer.
Yeah.
And I have had a buyer, because they didn't move money from a savings account to the checking to cover it, because they didn't think it was going to be cashed, bounce an earnest check went over like a lead balloon.
So really financial first-time home buyers.
Yeah,
They
you
have
do.
no idea.
So make sure you're clear about that. So Mr. Buyer, we're offering to close on September 30th and take possession next day. You are going to have the ability to do an appraisal, and your lender will order that appraisal, and you'll be paying for that appraisal at the time of the order. And so if for any reason the property were not to appraise, this does give us the right to renegotiate with the seller or cancel the deal, or you can choose to bring more down payment funds to close. In the event, I don't always go this far, but just so you guys hear it, in the event that the property were not to appraise for the purchase price, the first thing we're going to do is I want to make sure that the appraisal is at least accurate, because there are times when an appraiser will make a mistake. If you don't get that buyer's blessing that you're going to check that appraisal, and you go in and start fighting an appraisal up, they're not going to feel very good about that. So you do have to explain to them why you are fighting that appraisal. So sometimes if the subject has come up, or we're making an offer and I'm a little nervous about it, I may go into this language a little bit, or at least I'm going to do it when the appraisal comes in low. I'm going to say, okay, Mr. Buyer, slow down, here's what's going to happen. First of all, I want to get a copy of that appraisal. I want to make sure it's accurate. If you have a 4-bedroom house, I want to make sure he's appraising 4 bedrooms. If it's, finished basement, I want to make sure that's on there. If he's got comps, I want to make sure the comps he's using are true, fair comparables. Because sometimes lenders get so narrow-minded about they have to stay in that neighborhood or within that block or within that floor plan that they'll pick a house that doesn't make sense and try to appraise off of, try to do adjustments off of it When there's a house just like 2 more doors down, that, you know, it's just that much further away, that would still support the purchase price. So we just wanna make sure it's fair. Now, if it's fair, then guess what, Mr. Seller? You know, here's the honest appraisal, and now we've gotta do some work. So is that gonna be, we're gonna come down, are we, you know, is the buyer gonna come up, you know, what are we gonna do? If it's an FHA deal, you cannot go forward unless that purchase price matches. If you guys are writing deals on distressed property, and you're competing and you have an FHA buyer, let's say it's a $100,000 house, and it should be worth $150,000, and so you're comfortable having your buyer bid $110,000, $120,000, they have got to bring that extra over the purchase price to closing. So make sure they have that money in hand, because if they are FHA, it has to come in for the contract price that you write it up for. If it's a HUD home and the appraisal's already been done.
And do you ever run comps when you're writing the offer, if the buyers are getting stupid about, well, we think we get it for 120?
I run comps every single time. I always run comps. I always pull comps. The only time I would not do that is if I don't represent.
Okay.
All right, so this is the type of loan that you're getting. Go through that. That we're saying that you're pre-approved. And just know that we only have 30 days to get your loan committed to from your lender. So it's very important. This is when I give that speech about it's very important that if the lender asks you for documentation, that you give it to them right away. If they call and need an extra copy, if you need to go, that's fine. If you need a copy of extra paycheck stubs, they want your latest bank statement, you hustle that in right now. Don't delay. Also, stop buying things. So whatever, you know, your lender has now taken a snapshot of your financial life. You have this much in your bank account, you have this much in your savings, you have this much in debt. That should not change, okay? If it changes drastically one way or another, the lender just needs to know, okay? So if, you know, bad car repair happens between now and closing, you've got the money, you're fine, I still want you to call the lender and say, hey, I gotta make a $1,500 car repair, and so that money's coming out of my savings account. Exactly. Or they're getting a large sum of money from a relative, or they won a contest, or they got a bonus at work that isn't normal. You know, anything like that also needs to be explained to the lender. So that goes both ways. Okay, so that's where I talk about that. Then, Mr. Seller, you're going to have, I'm sure I have these in the right order. I think I do. Okay. That the seller is going to be responsible for maintaining the property, leaving utilities on through the date of possession, especially when you are representing a seller, make sure that you get that out to them. And that they have to maintain the insurance on the property. If for any reason between now and the date of close, a enormous, you know, Sharknado goes by, whatever weird movie disaster happens, you just know that there are contingencies written into the contract that if the property is destroyed over a certain, you know, percentage, that we have the right to walk away, the sellers have the right to walk away, or we can negotiate our way through it if you want to wait for the property to be rebuilt. But however that were to happen, the seller might want to sell it for more money. So there's just contingencies for that. Mr. Buyer, you have the right to do a survey. I do recommend that you do that survey, and I recommend that you do that survey during the inspection period. The contract's going to give you a little more time, but I just know best practice is to do that during the negotiation period when we're already negotiating other repairs. It just makes it easier. That way we're not hitting up the seller every couple of weeks with a problem. They don't like that. So, you know, surveys do cost. They're about $500 to $1,000 expense depending on the lot, the size of it, how complicated it is. You know, I know it's a big expense. You know, this is why it might protect you. I give them a couple of the examples that I gave you. But it ultimately is your decision. Just know if you do move forward without a survey, you are taking a risk. And if there ever were to be a problem with the fence or a driveway or an encroachment of some kind, you don't have insurance against the boundaries, only against the title to the home.
You can even negotiate that in as a seller before.
You technically could. I've done some acreage property where the seller can prove that they had owned a certain amount, you know, they say the property line goes here, but couldn't really prove it. And so I have written that in that they will provide and pay for the survey. All right, inspection period. So Mr. Buyer, we have 10 days to do inspections. It is my, my wish that we do those inspections within the first 3 to 4 business days, or first 3 to 4 days if possible. The reason being is because if the inspector were to reveal that there is a problem, I want you to have time to get it researched. Pull in a professional to give you a second opinion on it. Inspectors are like good bird dogs. They'll get you out there to where the birds are, and they'll point and say, there's a bird. But they're not the ones pulling the trigger. So they don't always know that how much something's gonna cost, or if it legitimately is a serious problem or just a minor problem. They just know, hey, that doesn't look right, that's a problem. So in the event that they say, hey, you know, we've got some questionable wear and tear on the heater, for example, it's a little rusty, they're not really qualified to say, and this is what needs to be done to fix it. They can just identify, hey, that's rusty, that's not supposed to be there. Make sense? So you might want to have an HVAC guy come back out and say, hey, is that really a problem? Is it just rust that can be cleaned and we can just monitor it? Or is the heat exchanger cracked and rusted through and we're going to die of carbon monoxide tomorrow? These are things that, you know, you want to have time. You don't want to wait till day 9, do the inspection, and then be stuck. So that's no fun. Okay, so Mr. Buyer, it's your responsibility to do inspections, pay for those inspections. Here's my list. And of inspectors, if they would like. And I'll talk to them about the termite rule. You know, please make sure you at least do termite because that's built into the contract. If you want to do any other inspections, it's totally your right. The seller will not pay for these inspections. If you do not do inspections, then you are not allowed to back out of the contract because of the condition of the home or ask the seller for any repairs. Now, once you do inspections, I just want you to be prepared. Every single house is going to give a report. A good inspector is going to give you a report that's probably about 40 to 80 pages long, and it's going to have some nice color photos on it. It's going to, you know, be sectioned off, easy to read, but it will look intimidating. Inspectors are going to classify it as serious concerns. Typically, most inspectors think a serious concern is something that's going to cost you more than $500. And then they're going to have some minor concerns, and they're just going to have some maintenance tips for you of things that they think would need to be done in the future. Every property is going to have some things. You know, you're not going to ever buy a property that's 100% maintenance free, and no seller is going to do 100% of everything on an inspection report. Just be prepared for that. What we want to do with this inspection is protect you from making a bad investment. So if the heat exchanger is going to cause you to die, hey, let's get that fixed. That's worth going back to the seller and saying, hey, let's get that fixed. But if we just need to do some simple maintenance, we just need to, you know, plug up a drippy faucet, we need to do a couple minor things, you know, that may be on you to take care of that when we buy the house. Thank you, Mr. Inspector, for letting us know. We'll take care of it. And to be honest with you, a lot of times it's better for you to do those repairs because a seller who's looking to get out of their home is going to find the cheapest possible person to do it. And is that who you really want putting on a new faucet for you? Yeah, I mean, it's a great script to kind of get your way out of those nickel and dime things that sometimes can bog down a contract. All right. Once you do the inspections, you have the right to accept the house as it sits, cancel the contract, or offer to renegotiate. Now, it's very common that you have to set the table. It's very common that many buyers will take property as it sits. If there's no major conditions and there's just a little bit of maintenance, they're fine with it and they'll move on. It's very rare, but sometimes it happens that, you know, we get into a property and we find out that the foundation is crumbling into sand. When you use an example, make it ridiculous. Because if you say, if the roof is bad, I guarantee you it's like you're putting it in the atmosphere, the roof will come back bad, and suddenly you've told the buyer you can cancel the contract. Okay? So, because that's something that the seller's not going to be able to sell the property with a bad roof, right? So make it ridiculous. Because if the foundation is crumbling into sand, you would know that.
Exaggerated.
Right? If you don't know it, you're in big trouble. You're not an inspector. Quote to quote, you're not an inspector, but you would know, you would be able to identify that there is sand and not a wall, right? So, okay. Or as much, sometimes commonly happens if we do find a big major item or two, then we're going to offer to renegotiate. Okay, now I'm saying all of this not to get the buyer out of asking for stuff, okay? Get that out of your head. But what I'm trying to do is just set the table that we're not worried about a list of 25 things. The seller will freak out, and then everything from that point will be difficult. Focus on the big rocks and make sure your buyer understands that. Because you could inspect a house with 5 different inspectors and get a list that would look like something 5 different ways. they're going to be focused on different things. So, you know, all you're trying to do is get a snapshot and identify the big ticket items. Okay. It is your responsibility to negotiate those repairs within 5 business days, or 5 days. That's why I keep saying that, 5 days.
It used to be, now it's
Yeah.
not.
5 days. So, you know, we always have timelines that we have to, you know, pay attention to. All right, defaults and remedies. So if for any reason, either one of you or the seller just is totally bad and you screw up this contract to the point where somebody backs out with no good cause, these are the rules that an attorney or a court judge would take in applying discipline to whoever was bad. So if the seller is bad to you, here's the rules. If you're bad to the seller, here's the rules. Any questions? Great, move on, right? I'm not gonna dwell on that, but I want them to know there is a protocol written into the contract. Also know that it is your responsibility to inspect for any microbial, environmental issues, any pollutants, radon, lead-based paint, anything that you're concerned about. Of course, the seller has to disclose what they know, but if they haven't given you any disclosure, then it is your job to make sure that those things don't exist if it's important to you. Okay. About 50-50 on my buyers doing radon. A lot of people ask me that. And how many of them do? And I've had one person do a lead-based paint test. Correct.
Well, the Brookfield, they do inspections, they do everything. They do radon, mitigation, everything. So if you see a corporate house, it's pretty, usually a pretty good house.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It affects their real, they won't buy it.
Right.
Yeah.
If they know up front, yeah. Okay, so we kind of already discussed this, but discussing it with the buyer is just, you know, I'm representing you as your designated buyer's agent, and we've already signed that paperwork. This just lets the seller know that I'm representing you at the highest level, and the people that are paying commissions to the agents are blank and blank. You already know that because we covered that at the buyer agency agreement signing, and then you have them sign.
And you should probably sign before they do, correct?
I just sign it with them. Like, I have them sign it, and then I sign
Okay.
it, yeah.
Did you have to explain it to them, is that when you start signing? Or you sign on each page?
Well, they're initially.
I'm not going to initial each page, but I will admit to you, when we went to initialing the bottom of these pages,
It's a nightmare.
I still every once in a while get away without having one initial, and I have to go back and get it done. So it's not a lot of fun, but yeah, I'm trying to get in the habit of, as we go through each page, just have them initial it. But I sometimes do find that it's just faster to go through it and then put it back in front of them and say, just initial every page. And if you feel like you need to read one, go ahead and read it. They won't. I mean, it'd be like 1 out of 50 that will go, okay, I want to read this line for line. You know.
We give them copies anyway, so usually I just email them to them.
Absolutely. All right, earnest money deposit. So this is, again, the reminder, the earnest money will be held, and that means cashed by a title company. I liken that to Switzerland, so it's a neutral party. So once you complete the sale of the home, then it'll be applied towards your purchase price or your down payment. And if for any reason, you know, we get the money back and it's allowable by contract, then we'll sign some paperwork and you'll get your check back. It just gives you the rules of how the money is held with the title company. All right, the seller will provide you with the taxes and any special assessments, and homeowners association dues will be prorated accordingly, so that, for instance, and I've already covered this with the buyer in my particular consultations, but I'll just remind them that the seller will pay them the taxes that are due in advance at the time of close for the bill that will be due at the end of the year. And that just says that everything will be prorated. The seller will provide you with evidence of title, and in our area, it is customary for the seller must pay for your title insurance. It's written into the contract. We don't even have to negotiate that. Yay. Isn't that great? And then the mechanics liens coverage will be included in your title insurance. Now I skipped a page somewhere along the line. And then the last page, I have the pages out of order. So then the last page is where they would sign. All right, now, instructions to you. You are going to put in on line 817 for your side, the brokerage, which would be Keller Williams, Kansas City North, your name, your phone number, fax, and email address. Courtesy is you look on the MLS sheet and you do the same thing for the listing agent. That way, if they chose to sign your offer as written, the agent doesn't have to do any work.
So it's even better.
It's just a nicety, yes. nothing makes me happier than when I see an offer and it's all filled out the way it should be, and you just know that you're dealing with a professional that way. Licensee assisting buyer is the one that filled out this form, so you are gonna check in that big box, licensee assisting buyer, and sign it. All that's saying is you are the person that helped the buyer write this offer. It could be that you are the licensee assisting the seller. If you're doing what we call a reverse offer, and I've done a couple of those, where you have a buyer look at a house again and again and again and again, and they don't make an offer. So I'll call the seller and say, let's make them an offer. What's your best offer? Let's just throw something out there. And so we write the offer. Let's see if we can get it together.
Never heard of that. It's interesting.
It is interesting. In a bad market, sometimes that's the way to get it done. But Edie did that a lot. She actually, before she joined Keller Williams, came and did a class on it, which was kind of cool, how they did it.
See, I just love this, I just love learning all this stuff.
Yeah. She's a good gal. Okay, so now, when you're receiving the offer as a listing agent, you do not need to sign anything here. Okay, you don't have to sign this also or anything like that. The only time you would ever sign line 850 is when your seller is rejecting the offer and is not going to counter. So in the instance that it's my listing and all 4 of you wrote me offers, and I like Vicky's offer the best, or my seller likes Vicky's offer the best, then I'm going to sign this rejection on your offer, and your offer. Or I could accept them as backup if you guys wanted to do that.
You still have to look at them, negotiate, and pick one. You can't just like sit them on, and you get best and final, but like that.
Yeah, so if that were to happen, I would call every agent, so I would call all 4 of you and say, hey, I have more than one offer on the property. My seller has, given a courtesy that by 4 o'clock tomorrow, we would like to see anyone's best and final offer. If you would like to revise it, use a counter offer, addendum, and present it to me by 4 o'clock tomorrow. Then I would go to my seller with all 4 offers and say, here's your 4 offers. Which one would you like to negotiate with or accept? But I can't say, okay, Vicki, her buyer offered X and you're offering Y. Do you want to raise your offer?
Yeah.
And we'll work with you. Like, I can't use one against the other or negotiate 2 at the same time. Hey, the seller said 220. Which one do you want to take it? I have to pick one and counter it out. So if I pick you to counter, if it needs to be countered, then I can say, hey, we'll pick your offer, but we are recountering. We don't want to pay those closing costs, but if your buyers will agree to that, we'll take your offer. And then you go, oh no, screw that. Okay, great. Vicki, here's what we want to do. Lois, here's what we want to do, right? And I just work my way right down the line. But you can't do all at once. Okay?